Welcome to the Masters of Metrics podcast, helping you get more out of your digital marketing investment. This podcast is proudly hosted by DigiVisor, a platform for people who want to grow their business by taking a data-driven approach. Now here's your host, Emma LaRusso.
Today I'm joined by Kshira Saagar. Kshira is Chief Data Officer at Latitude Financial Services and previously headed up data-driven analytics at the Iconic and their parent organisation, Global Fashion Group. He's been recognised as one of the top 10 analytics leaders in Australia for 2019 and 2020, a huge achievement after a decade in the analytics and decision sciences industries. Kshira has developed solutions for retail, telecom and insurance, marketing departments at leading Fortune 100 clients, and his data expertise has enabled better decision-making for clients in media, healthcare, aviation, logistics, and FMCG organisations. There is so much we can learn from you, Kshira. Thank you for joining us on Masters of Metrics today.
Thank you, Emma. It's so great to be here, and thanks for having me. And I really love the title of your podcast, Masters of Metrics. I think it says a lot about what the podcast is going to be, so it's amazing.
Well, given your awards in the top 10 analytics leaders, we had to have you on board. So I've been lucky enough to hear you speak before, and it's a great story. And I think, apart from every us in the industry, every C-level, every board member needs to hear your views as well. So let's unlock this a little bit more. So Kshira, you've spent a lot of time helping those key decision makers we just talked about, the CXOs of the Fortune 100 companies make smarter decisions using data. But I think at the core is your passion. You believe every organisation can become truly data-driven, irrespective of their size or their domain or systems. And this will be really interesting for all our listeners as to how do they go about it? How can businesses get better at using data to know and engage and win with their customers? So unpack your career and expertise. You started in data science, but you really got involved in that client engagement and that impact on the sales function. How did that evolve for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I tell people that it's almost like falling in love. I fell into data rather than make a conscious decision about coming into a career with data. So when I started, data science was not necessarily a job opportunity. So I loved math a lot. And in high school growing up, I loved math a lot. And I wanted to do a job where you used math. And they said, oh, this job, you can use data and stats. And that turned up being the job. And I was lucky to be at the right place at the right time, where it was a consulting kind of company where you would come and solve a problem for 3 to 6 months and go away and solve another problem for somebody else, short, sharp engagements. And what that did was, over time, trying to solve these problems, one thing I learned really quickly, it's not about solving the problem. No one cares. It's about, once you've solved the problem, how does somebody use it? And so that's where the client engagement piece comes in, because I quickly learned that people building these complex segmentation models back then, or building these complex understanding customer behaviors or predicting them, but they were not able to translate them into something that people could use. So the decision makers had that barrier between them and the people who were using data, right? So I realized quickly that somebody who could translate from data to English or math to English or whatever language somebody spoke was a crucial element. And so that meant moving into a client engagement role where you would be the interface between the team that's working on it and the client that uses it. And so that was interesting. But I think after doing that for a while, what had happened was, in my career, I worked for, like you mentioned, for retail, for FMCG, for gambling, for banking, for insurance, for airlines, quite a few things. And then all small, sharp engagements. And one thing I picked up a lot is, at the end of the day, it's all the same. And so you know how the secret sauce in all the ingredients is essentially salt. And so that's how I realized the secret sauce in all of these data engagements was, how do you get the data and help someone make a decision, right? And so what that meant was, they were building up a pre-sales function, and they said, why don't you come run a pre-sales engagement, which was a shorter, sharper engagement than a short and sharp engagement. You could come in, solve a problem in like a few weeks' time, show the potential client a value in trying to engage with you. And they'll be like, yeah, we want to do this forever. And so that is a skill that I honed. And that's something I brought into my current roles too, where I've started a new role at Latitude now. And the first thing I do is go ask everyone what their problems are and try to solve them in a quick way, gain credibility, gain the trust, and then also show them what we can do with data. So that's how it's been so far.
Sure. I'm just going to say there's another skill that I've observed, and I can already hear it. I just hearing that first, you're a great storyteller. Were you always a great storyteller? And then you've just bought that skill and overlaid it, over the top of telling the story that the data's really showing? Or is it that you just got better at telling the story from the insights to getting buy-in?
I think it's a mixture of both. I definitely did have a storytelling knack I picked from my grandfather, but I think I slowly realized that people would zone out after a point with all the data and stats and tech, although as important as they are. And so if you can weave them into a story and then try to feed it to them, it's like mixing the sugar with the medicine. A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, and a story always makes the point go down. So I think to one point when somebody asked me, how do you make sure that you convince a senior board member or an exec to take a decision? I always start my presentations with a story. I'm like, hey, this is a Zen Kongan story, or this is something. And then and then you're like, yeah, it makes so much sense. And it's the same thing. I would have said the same thing, but I think human beings connect to stories because that has a start and an end and a purpose and a meaning. And I think that's what I'm trying to bring to data.
I love it. I love the challenge. Well, let's unpack this as we go through some of the examples. I'm very interested. Obviously, you talked about this speed of problem solving and being able to get that credibility. You went in as the senior data scientist at Fairfax Media in 2015, which was a very challenging time for all the traditional media companies. You know, they were all trying to solve. They all knew they had to monetize the business model and, you know, the digital business model. How did you go about that there? How did you get that speed given that complexity of that problem?
It's interesting. I call that the late life crisis. They were trying to debate, like you said, being an advertiser versus a publisher. So the mandate given to us was twofold. One is how do we, and think about this, back then, Fairfax, SMH, The Age, domain.com.au, some of the most read website publications in Australia, New Zealand. What that means is buckets and buckets of data coming through. And this is 5-7 years ago when we didn't have the right technologies to scan and use them. And all we were asked to do is figure out two things. One, how do we make sure the traffic stays on the network, not on site, on the network? So if somebody's reading an article on SMH, how do we make sure that he or she goes to the domain and comes back to the SMH or the AFR and does not go away somewhere else? Because the more time they spend on site is the more time you can show them ads. So those challenges are interesting. It's not just about understanding how many it's not about understanding how many people are there. It's about understanding what drives them to come back. So we find interesting things like if you put in a real estate news, but the real estate news is on domain, but the main headlines on SMH, people will click on it, go to domain, and then you'd have to at the end put in something that will bring them back to the SMH. So how does that work? And so trying to keep the traffic within the network. So that was a very interesting challenge. And the other one was obviously a more complex challenge where we wanted to understand which reader is going to click on what ad, and therefore we can hyper target them. Because at the end of the day, we were not only a third party ad seller, we were also a first party advertiser. So much real estate on the most visited website in Australia, New Zealand. So we could tell, say, an advertiser, you want somebody to click on your job ads, we'll advertise on this site at 3 p.m. because somebody's going to read the closing bell news at the stocks page, yada, 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 and therefore get that kind of attraction and understanding. So those are the two things that we tried to solve at scale. And yes, to your point, it was definitely difficult because we didn't have the tools, we didn't have the capabilities that we have now. And so it was more about trying to get the tools, get the data in the shape we could analyze them, and then also convince people who've done things a certain way for 30-40 years. We're like, but why do we want to do all of this? People are just going to read the news, and we're like, beyond that, there's other things to do.
So you talked about that challenge of that first challenge, right? That they gave you of this, how do we keep them on? Was that the start of you really looking at the customer experience, or had that come before that? Or has that just been core or evolved over time? Because it really is, that's what you're trying to use insights for. It's the outcome you're trying to drive, the great experience for that customer. Where did that sit in the journey, and how's that evolved for you over time?
I think it definitely came in from the old school approach of getting people to use your products more. And so they knew that's what they needed to do. Now, how that is done and why they do it, what should we do to do it? And those are things that we don't know. So they knew the what needs to be done and the how was the missing part. And so they're like, okay, you have all of this bucket loads of data, figure out the how for me. Tell me what is making them come back to the site. Tell me what is making them use the paper more. So it was more of they knew the what, the business knew the what, we were just the how part of it, which made it much easier because we could just pilot an idea, take it to the editorial board and say, hey, these things work. What do you think? And they're like, yep, this works. This doesn't sit with us creatively. This doesn't make sense. And so it was really easy to work on that. And then that devolved into a lot of other ideas down the line. But yeah, that's how it started.
And I'm not sure whether it's the last 5 years because like you talked about the tools of making it easier to be able to stitch all these things together and see it and do some of the analysis. What do you think has mostly changed over the last, say, 5 or 10 years, whatever time frame you pick, where you feel it is? And is it common across all the industries you've worked in, or are there differences that you've seen?
I think a lot of industries are trying to learn interesting things from each other. So the example I give is in the retail world, the customer is always right. The customer centricity is always the motto and the model. So if you don't, the customer experience is not good, nobody's going to come back to you. But in the banking and the financial world, it's all about profits and figuring out how do you make the best out of what you have. And in the operations and the FMCG world, it's all about getting the most out of the resources you have. And I think what I've realized in the last 5-7 years is the banking industry wants to be like the retail industry where they want to be customer centric. So it's not just a credit card number anymore. They want to treat you like a customer and give you a personal loan. The retail industry wants to be like a bank and say, okay, I don't want to burn money anymore. I want to make a profit too. And the operations industry is saying, oh, by the way, we want to learn these things from the banking. So I think that's what's happened. And that is the one thing that I've seen change. Apart from the tools that have come up, which have made things easier, what the business expects and the senior leadership expects is, I can see X is doing it. Why can't we do it? And so that's the mindset. If person X or company X can be so customer centric, why can't we be customer centric? And it's a fair question to ask. Or the banks are saying, if company Y in that space understands their customer so well, we have all the money sitting here, why can't we understand our customer so well? So I think that's the questions have become more complex. The people are not solving the same problems anymore because the board and the execs are asking these different, completely operate in a different way. That means the data is also getting to be operating in a different way. So that's something that I've seen change. And so despite all the tools, the challenges are new. And so the tools are catching up, but the challenges are continuously changing. And this is how I think about it.
You just touched on that customer centricity, and a few that we've talked to also talk about this and whether, we're even there yet, right? What does it mean to have the customer at the center of everything and to be able to have that 360 view in real time? What do you think the objective should be for a data-driven business? And is that something that is core to it? Is it actually the objective? Have we realized it? How do you look at that in terms of how you approach getting the objective that would drive what you do?
I have acronyms for everything, otherwise I forget. So my acronym for being a data-driven business is what I call the VIP approach to things. And so the VIP stands for visibility. So visibility of all the data that you have, and for everyone to know what's happening across the business. To be truly data-driven or customer-centric or any of those high-level mandates, you first need to understand what's happening. And I think a lot of businesses operate in a way where data is siloed. There are people who don't want to give their data to you and their data feed them and stuff. So breaking those barriers and giving everyone a visibility and changing how people, I've seen that myself, at least at the Iconic, where if everyone has access to some of the key reports and dashboards, for example, on a daily basis that they can open up and see how the business is doing, the way they start their day is very different. They're like, oh, yesterday we did well, today we're not doing well, so we should do something differently. And so they have a purpose to do things, so that visibility changes how you operate. The I is intelligence. Again, the thing with data is, and I've seen this a lot in my career, is people get so excited collecting that data, bringing these new streaming tools and all of this stuff. And once the data is collected, what do we do with it? No one cares, right? So I think that's where it stops. It's just hoarded like it's gold in Fort Knox and nobody can use it. You can't take it out of the system and because of the regulation. So how do you translate that into intelligence and make decisions? And intelligence doesn't have to be super intelligence. It's something simple as maybe next week we don't need 5 more casual people because we don't have that kind of demand. Some simple things like that. I think that kind of intelligence is the second part that will make it a data-driven business. And the last one is purpose. And so when I mean P for purpose for the data team to exist and purpose for the business to have a data team. And those are two different purposes. So the business, when you're starting up, everyone's like, oh, this is really cool. We need a data team. We need to do these things. And then halfway through, they don't know what this team's doing. And if we even need them, can we just not buy a tool that does all of it? And the team also does not know what they are doing for the company. So there is no purpose. So to be truly data-driven, I think both the sides need to know what the purpose for their existence is. And so with that VIP approach, visibility, intelligence, and purpose, a business can truly become data-driven or at least aim to become data-driven in how they operate.
I don't know if you're able to share this, and because you only knew, I guess, to Latitude, so it might not be them, but I'd love to, where do you think the VIP acronym actually came to life best? What was the purpose? How did the visibility lead to the insights and or ultimately lead to success? Do you have a good example of that?
Yeah, so I definitely always use Iconic as the example because I've spent considerable amount of time there and I could see that come to life. So the visibility part is anybody who's at the Iconic has an iconic.com.au email ID, can log in on the first day and see all the reports across all the departments. So you're in marketing, you can see what commercial's doing. In commercial, you can see what the operations are doing. You're in operations, you can see what the product performance is. Everyone can see everything. And that changes how you think. And I've seen that change. Intelligence, we've kind of like automated away a lot of stuff that people come in, spend. And the best example is social media marketing or search engine marketing. We have seen in the marketing team, the first 2-3 hours in the day, they would come in, download a sheet from Google, get a list of the keywords, copy paste it somewhere, find out what's happening, change the bid. And we're like, we'll automate all of that for you. We'll make that intelligent. You can spend time on the creative side of things. And so that makes their lives better. And so that is the intelligence part. And the purpose part is the way we've embedded data. We had embedded, and the way data still exists at the Iconic is data is a part of the business function. It's not sitting separately, and it's not sitting completely within the function. It's in a hub and spoke way where the data person will sit with the business. They'll be part of their meetings. They'll be part of their discussion, their strategies, their thought process. So they can aid and augment their thinking, but also they work with the central data team so that they know the tools and the technologies. And they're like, hey, I already know person why solve this. Why are we doing this again? And so she can then go and bring a problem solved and then give it to them. So I think that is the way where we know what the purpose is. So that's one good example I can think of where we've done it.
No, that sounds like a great example. And obviously Iconic, I mean, it's been amazing, right? They move very fast. And that leads me actually to the question around e-commerce businesses. A lot of, particularly COVID, forced a lot of bricks and mortar to really double down and make this work, right? And some of the big retailers actually got stuck by their inferior experiences. Do the questions, the decisions change? Maybe that integration in terms of finding that purpose. How does that kind of flow through in a different way to, say, a finance business?
I think the way I describe an e-commerce business or a digital native business, let's say, is there are things you do just because you can do it. And it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. So let me explain, right? In terms of the VIP construct, you can pretty much get your hands on any data you want on a near real-time to real-time basis. But then it begs the question of what are we going to do with it? And so people just want to collect it, but what are we doing with it becomes difficult. So you need to change the mindset of maybe how are you going to use it and why do you need it for? So that is a lot of conversation there, because getting data is not a challenge at all in a digital e-commerce business. People always have the data. So the challenge is all about what do I do with this data and how do I parse it and distill it and use it in a way that makes sense. So that becomes the biggest challenge. And the other bigger challenge with e-commerce again is because it's always the younger brother or the younger sister in such a big market where the penetration is still anywhere from 10 to 14%. Like only 10 to 14 out of every $100 is being spent online. So you're still fighting for that other $86 to $90. And so you're still fighting in the unknown world of why are people not coming shopping with us? We have the best app and we have all the cool features, but people still don't want us. And honestly, we still don't have the right answer to it. People would much prefer to wear a mask, take a car, go to a Westfield and buy it than go online. And so I'm not saying everyone will, but there are people who will. And so what drives them is still an unknown question. And so that be something trying to figure out. So that changes how they think and how they operate. And everything we try to do is what can I do to get more customers? It's all about land grabbing and not about keeping customers, and still all about getting more customers, acquiring new customer base, getting to a new demographic and trying to answer as many questions as possible. So it's a very different go mindset compared to an established business or a financial world where we're like, we know all we need to know. We just want to keep what we have and maintain what we do and do it better in terms of customer experience. So I think that's the difference that comes in.
And that's a good point. In terms of as marketers, right, where do you see general brand plays and the importance, say, brand versus the personalized digital marketing, which is really trying to drive an outcome? What metrics are important to actually even be able to measure whether one's helping the other or vice versa? Like, what's your view of that brand versus that real kind of performance marketing?
Yeah, I think it's a very touchy topic, right? There are extremists on both ends of it. And I'll be honest, right? I'm kind of a moderate on this. I've seen people, I've been in meetups and gatherings with people like, oh, TV is dead. Nobody watches TV. And I'm like, that can't be true. So many people watch TV. I go out walking and everyone's watching TV at prime time. So definitely not true. And there are people on the other end who are like, nothing works on digital and it's all money thrown into the sink and everyone's out to rob you. So I try to take a moderate stance. So I believe there's a strong place for the brand place. And when I mean a brand play, awareness, creating awareness in an audience where it does not exist at all. creating a market for yourself, talking to people who don't even know who you are and trying to create some kind of an intention. I think out of home media or TV and radio do a really good job there. Yes, there's YouTube and catch up TV and all of this stuff, but the scale at which these things exist, it's really hard to come by. And on the other end, you're right, with personalized targeting and personalized offers and stuff like that, yes, you cannot beat a digital medium to do it. And so in both ends, the way I measure them are different, right? So I know people tend to take an ROI, an ROAS approach to everything, and that's unfair because your brand ROI is always going to be in like some crazy numbers, and your social media ROI is going to be in a different number. So the way I approach it is, one is good for efficiency, the other is good for efficacy. So effectiveness is measured by brand health surveys like aided awareness and unaided awareness in your market share, or understanding a brand score or brand equity. Those are things that are really hard to measure in the digital world, because in a digital world, when you try to create awareness, you end up creating awareness in an echo chamber where people who already know you, and people who don't know you absolutely don't know you. So it's hard to create that. So that's one metric that I like to use for the effectiveness. And in the digital world, I like to use the efficiency. I'm not a big fan of the ROI. I use something called the CIR, which is an inverse of it, which is cost to income ratio. So the way that happens is, what is the cost? What percentage of cost for that particular channel am I willing to put in to get the income? So I'm willing to put in 5% of the income from that channel to get the traffic I need. So if 5% is a CIR, that's the measure that I use to say for paid search. And for say display ads, it's 15% because it takes more time to work on display. So what is the CIR measure? So CIR here, and on the other end, it's mostly brand health and everything else.
Already some gold there. I like the efficacy measure at the brand and the efficiency at the kind of the performance end, but the CIR, that makes so much sense. So, I mean, this probably again is kind of in that vein. If you look at customer success, how would you set the measures around that? So brand and maybe performance is make a customer get from I don't know you to I'm referring you. But what about that customer success? What do you look to set in place, and what are those measures? And do you see the funnel in a certain way, or?
So I look at customer success as a two-dimensional. So one dimension is definitely NPS, which is Net Promoter Score. And before people start thinking, oh, NPS is such an old world's way of thinking, I'm like, no, listen to me. NPS, but tracked in the right way. NPS tracked at a customer level. So you can go back to the customer and see what she's done, why she's happy or unhappy, and what she's bought. So you can do all of that stuff at a customer level. And the second dimension is the customer life cycle or the life stage, the standard marketing AIDA, awareness, intention, desire, action, or the AAR funnel that Google comes up with, which is awareness, acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, referral. So the R funnel. So whatever works for you. NPS across all of those parameters is what I look to see customer success as. So in terms of your awareness, there's no NPS, it's mostly brand health. How aware are they of you? But in the activation stage, how happy did you make their initial onboarding process? How happy are they? In your retention process, how happy are you making them? How much are you communicating with them? How little are you communicating with them? And how informed are you keeping them? In the referral process, how much happy are they that they're going to become your own champion? So looking at something like an NPS across these parameters at different stages, and then coming up with a combined composite NPS will give you a true sense of how successful your customers are, or how successful you are in making your customers happy. And it also gives you a tactical way of then going and solving for those particular areas, rather than looking at a group level NPS saying it's 46 or something, and like, what do I do with this number? But you have a different number, different stage. You can hold different people accountable. Everyone knows where they're working to, and they can make the customers happy.
Can I ask you, because I think, I mean, again, it's a very smart way. If you don't know what levers you have, you don't know what you can actually move to drive outcomes. So that talks to that. Is this true, would you say, to implement in a smaller organization, or is this something that you need lots of resources for? Just thinking about the scale and to be able to say, to make that possible.
Yeah, I'd say any size can do it. Like mostly the smaller ones should definitely do it because you have only fewer customers and it's much easier to do it. Like just send them an NPS. It's just an email thing. There are so many survey platforms now, Survey Gizmo, Survey Monkey. Like you don't have to do it. Like if you want to do it at a small scale, you can still do it. And there are definitely better products out there which do it at enterprise level. So yeah, I don't think the size of the company should matter. And it's just that the mandate for the NPS program should not be the output, but the input. And that's what I change it. Like you said, it's not about what the score is, because the score at the end of the day is just the canary in the coal mine. You know there's a noise, but you don't know why the noise is coming. So you just need to make sure that the way you set it up is that the input drives the output. So that's how I think about it.
I'm curious, because I, by the way, agree. It's, in fact, like to your point, smaller organizations should be doing it because that's their pathway to big, right? Like actually know where you can play to win and grow. If you, like with this world of kind of where AI and a lot of automation is playing in some of these things, how do you look at segmentation? How granular do you typically take a view of a customer base, irrespective of the size, or is there a size component in that?
No. So I think one thing that one of my mentors taught me early on is there are different things when it comes to segmentation. One is a persona, which is who your customer is and understanding what they are and like their attributes so that people can understand, oh, she's a fuzzy shopper and she's like, he's a whatever it is, a spendthrift shopper. And so that's the persona. And then there is the marketing cell, which is the age-old marketing cell, 25 to 35-year-old men living in 2000 and 2010. That's the marketing cell. But segment is something that is very behavioral. And so the size of the data doesn't matter. Segment is something that is very fluid. It is not defined by who you are, but it's defined by what you do. And so every company has a set of customers that do something. So maybe you won't have 20 segments, maybe you won't even have 5 segments, you only have 3 segments, but one segment is somebody who loves you and they keep coming back to you. One segment just used you because they had no other reason. And the other segment is somebody who really does not care either way. So everyone has at least those 3 segments. And then you start thinking about them differently. So my advice always is to any size of business is segmentation does not have to be this lengthy, laborious process. You could just look at your customer base, look at their behavioral traits, and then immediately say, I have 2-3 types of people, and then you can start making them bigger and bigger.
Again, amazing. You've shared that with me before, and that's how we approach it. So I did take that lesson before in terms of DigiVisor's own view of that. How do you work with boards or the C-level in integrating the opportunities that, data science and these insights to input into strategy and solving those key strategic objectives? Like, how are you finding that best works?
I'm a big fan of the cold opening. So a cold opening is where you show what happens in the end and then slowly unravel it as and when people need it. So it's like, hey, if you do this, this will happen. Hey, this is something we found. Or that's all I've seen senior leaders have time for. Not that they don't care. It's just that there are so many other things to worry about. A CEO or a CFO, million other things to worry about. He or she is not going to sit down and say, tell me how you did this segmentation, right? So they like implement this, you're getting like 20% uplift from your revenue and you decrease 10% your churn, that's X million dollars. And then when you start unpacking it, again, make sure that even the unpacking is a cold opening of a smaller cold opening, which is okay, segmentation as these are the 5 types of people we have and this is what we think. And more often than not, I've seen that people are happy to have some level of abstraction. They trust you if they see that the output is pragmatic and makes sense. And they're like, okay, I trust the other parts or interface with someone else who's going to go into the details, right? I've seen that base very effective when you communicate with senior leaders because 1, they're time poor, and 2, all they're trying to assess is, can you help me with data? Not, do you know how to do your work? All they're saying is, can you help me? I have to make a decision. I have to sign a check of $10 million. Should I do it or not? Just tell me that. And I think that's the best way I've seen that work, especially with board, when you're seeking funding, when you're going to an investment committee asking for funds. All they need to know is, I know what I'm talking about. This is what will happen. Trust me. Oh, by the way, here's everything that you need to know if you want to go into the details.
Like that. I mean, it plays, like you said, that alignment to, if this is the objective they're chasing, here's what you can deliver to that. Yeah, within that time frame. And as I think you touched on before, that gives you the credibility. So I would imagine then the sign-offs become faster and bigger over time. Talking about that story, I mean, you mentioned your grandfather and, you like that story because it gets the imagination and the buy-in and the interest from the individual. But I mean, I've sat in plenty of presentations and, speaking where you're listening to someone thinking, why are you going into that level of detail? What's your advice to people who work in data and are looking at, maybe they can see the truth in it, but how do they tell the story? Like, how do you build your story and your phrasing to get that buy-in engagement?
So I'll tell you a story, and then that story will be the example of what happened, right? It's the best way to answer. The complex part was we had an old legacy infrastructure. Everyone wanted to move to the cloud, and they were holding everyone hostage, and people didn't want to move to the cloud and all the technical stuff, and nobody was getting what had happened. So my story was, there's this old mayor and then a mayor of a beach town. Let's say Coffs Harbor, if you want to. And so the only beauty of that beach town was the beach. And so everyone would visit the town for the beach. But what happened over time was, over many years, because of fracking and all the pollution, the beach started collecting a lot of rubble. And then the beach started filling up with rubble and then with rocks and then more rocks, to the point where people couldn't walk to the beach anymore and enjoy it. But the mayor was very adamant. He's like, this is the attraction of the town. This is the centerpiece. I will show everyone how to still access the beach. So he would walk on the beach with his bare foot and show everyone that it can be done. But people got tired of that after a point and said, you could probably do it, but we are not patient enough to do it. We just can't access the beach. Why don't you, as a mayor, do something about it? And so he said, in all my infinite wisdom, I think we should just cover the beach with a leather blanket so that everyone can walk on the rocks. And then people are like, seems like a very expensive way of solving this problem, or very illogical, impractical way. And they couldn't say anything because he's the smart mayor. He knows what's good for the beach. But a 7-year-old kid says, hey, why don't we just wear shoes and walk on the beach and then clean the rubble later, right? And I tell people I want to be like that 7-year-old kid. But the story, then I just say, now you know what the beach is. The beach is the database. The rubble is all the bad data that's coming through. The layer that you're trying to cover on top is the cloud that you want to bring in. The shoe I'm telling you is the tools that you want to wear. And so now you can see the connect to everything. And so basically the way I came up with the story is by figuring out what are the things I want to do, working back metaphorically what would work, and then coming up with the story. And so that's how I typically, and so you can't look, you can't look the story up. It doesn't exist. I just try to create a story of my own from what I want to explain, and then just give it a metaphor or an allegory. And then people then understand the story. Now, every time I went to that committee, I would say, are we clearing the beach? Yes. How much pebbles are there? How many shoes do we have? And so everyone still knows that story. They remember it. It's no longer just a topic on the subcommittee meeting, but it's actually something that everyone can understand.
And a visual that stays firmly in the mind.
Yeah.
Have you, I mean, I'm sure you've seen lots of dangers, and I'd love to talk to you about that. I mean, we often hear, no matter what, someone will come back or use the analogy of, data point of one, but I do this, so therefore everyone does. The other one is probably like the materiality of the change or the insight. Like it might look big in a percentage, but relative, it's actually not. Where do you see the dangers when people are looking at data? Could they misinform themselves, or in that building of the story? Where have you seen that go wrong, or where are those dangers?
Yeah, definitely in areas where there's not enough data, what we try to do is, example, when you're trying to build a new product or a new feature or going into a new market, just have no data. And the first thing we call out is data cannot solve this problem. The limitations of data needs to be called out. And the best example is world hunger. Yes, you can technically solve it, but you can't, like there are problems that you can't just solve with data. And so just calling that out and saying, hey, we're severely limited here. We don't have the right data. We don't have the right know-how. So anything that you say here is a guess. And if you're happy to do that guess, that's fine, but data is not supporting this. So we have to call that out. And I think the problem that, and rightly, like you said, the problem happens because some people tend to think everything can be solved with data, and that's not true. And so that is where the limitations of data click in. And somebody just has to call it out and say, I don't think you guys can solve it. And we have to call it out too.
Do you, just on that, you talked about the promise of data and maybe some people's belief that it will solve things. Do you believe big data has lived up to the hype that it had? And do you think AI is going to live up to the hype or the fear that's there? What's your thoughts about when we create these big phrasing points and there's some belief that will solve everything?
Yeah, and even the founders of the new neural networks, Jan LeCun and Jeffrey Hinton, all of those people, when you listen to them, all they've been telling us is AI is not going to do the kind of things that you expect it to do because it's a tool. It will just be a tool till forever. You can do whatever you want to do with it. And so what you do with it and how you use it rests on the human beings that use it still, right? And so I don't think we're still at the stage of the general level of AI or the general AI as they call it. So to your question, no, I don't think it's still lived up to the hype of solving a lot of problems. At least for 90% of the world, it's not solved all the problems that it should have, because we're still chasing the best ad click ratio. We're still chasing the best referral click ratio, and the smartest minds are working on those problems. So I think maybe when that stops happening and people actually start solving real life problems, maybe what should the traffic be on the road? How many buses do we actually need on a real time basis? And when should the trains start and stop? And things that everyone needs, or for the COVID example, real time predicting how many people should come into the city today and so that there's no traffic at all. These are all problems that AI can solve. It's just that we're not directing the tools to solve these problems. We're still solving very pecuniary and monetary problems that are very, very small and isolated.
So Kshira, I mean, I'm glad you touched on that, because, it's my view that all of this should be helping us to just make better decisions. The value in the human is what question we ask of it. But just hearing you just talk about even those questions, should it start with the question before you approach the data? Is that the order, or is it something, I mean, obviously it goes backwards and forwards, but
More often
the
than
reason why those technologies that they haven't lived up to it because people don't ask the right questions right from the outset.
exactly.
Yeah.
And more often than not, if you think about as humans, half the human race is women, and women have so many physical issues and stuff like that. And the AI could be used to solve those problems, could be used to solve medical problems. And I'm not saying they're not being used, but they're not being used at scale and the volume that which we're solving customer segmentation problems or trying to solve ad effectiveness problems or marketing. Those are being solved so many times and so often that nobody's solving these other real world human problems. And I think that's nobody's asking that question enough, or maybe those questions are not getting funded enough by the people. And I think that's the other part too. And so, like you rightly said it, when you ask that question, the obvious next answer is, okay, let me solve it, but where is the data? And we don't have the data. So maybe we need to start collecting the data for it. That will take another 3 to 5 years, and then start using the tools to solve these problems. So even if we start asking these questions, the lead time to start analyzing them is going to be a few years from now. So yeah, I think that's where it starts.
So let's go back to, actually, I wonder about the funding on some of those things. Is that funding, or is it actually the questions, knowledge, skill of the government, or does it start at education? I mean, I think there's probably a bigger where how do we help our leaders of the future know how to approach that? There's probably in there,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. And so one thing I'm a big fan of and I'm very passionate about is about data literacy. And it's not about how to use metrics. It's about what data can do. And so when I talk to high school kids and uni kids, I do courses for high school students about getting into career with data. What I tell them is, how can you use data to figure out which queue to stand in a burger shop? You can use data for that. How do you use data to figure out which lane to take on a trafficked road, so that you can reach a destination? But again, you can use data. And so when you start thinking that you can use data in all of these other areas and not just chasing the dollar and chasing the customer, and you can use data in your life and what to do with your life, then you can definitely start knowing what the power of math and data. And then you can start thinking about these other problems. I think it starts there about disabusing people of the notion that data is a very corporate tool that people use, that Google and Facebook used to do stuff. I think that mindset needs to change and people need to start seeing what it can do otherwise too.
So there's a branding issue there for the data people, right?
Exactly.
So back to the smaller business owner or someone who's got an idea and maybe not a lot of resources, because typically in small business, it's resources that's the constraint perhaps. How can they think about leveraging or introducing data-driven systems and processes to grow their business?
So I often have this acronym for them. It's the D cube for the data team, smaller companies. So the first D is define. Define what you want to solve with data. More often than not, what happens is they go somewhere, they see something, or they come from a different place where some other tools and technologies have been used, and they're like, we just need to use it. Maybe you don't even need it. All you need to do is solve these 3 problems: how to get more customers, how to make sure that I'm not bleeding money. What is the question that you want to answer? And then start looking into what data and tools and people you need. So that's the first define. The second one is depend. So sometimes you can't solve all the problems for yourself, especially if you're a small company, you're resource constrained. Be happy to depend on someone. Don't try to, I think not built here mindset is the ruin of a lot of these smaller companies, because people are like, if I don't build it here, nobody should, we can't do it. It's not everything needs to be IP. Some things are, you can just buy a tool off the shelf that somebody's put in 10,000 hours. It's okay to do it when you start. And then the third one is defend. Defend what you need to build in-house and make sure that you keep the IP in-house. So if you think that's the secret sauce of your company and that's what you're going to make you stand out, defend for your life to build it in-house and get the funding or the resources to do it. But otherwise, define, depend, and defend. And so don't try to do everything in one place. So that's how I like to think about it. And so that gives people a clear demarcation on, yeah, these are things that we'd love to do, but we just don't have the capability or the skill set or the need to do it ourselves. Let's get help from someone else. Let's depend on someone. And these are things that are central to the way the business operates. Let's defend and build it ourselves. And that will tell you how your data strategy is going to look like.
You've worked with a lot of businesses. Do you think the C-level needs to be a data-driven person from their whole kind of, DNA out, probably like you was looking at data or math as a kid and looking at patterns and trying to ask the right questions? Is there a success factor there if it is really core in an organization?
It definitely helps, at least in my previous experience. If they are data driven, or at least they have a passion for understanding things, the visibility part of it, then it helps us because they ask for it and we bask in their glory. The halo effect is there. So we can actually push through a lot of changes. Otherwise, it's changing that mindset is so hard because you spend so much time just changing people's mindset that, hey, we need to use data, that you don't actually do some valuable work. And so it definitely is a critical success factor.
We go, so a lot of, particularly small organizations, and they're trying to build, maybe it's an e-commerce business and there's social search and trying to create the best frictionless experience to outcome. What insights are kind of key at that level? And is it different if it's a different type of business, if it was bricks and mortar? And then what's your view of the importance of that real-time kind of test and learn environment? Like what does a lab look like? And is that actually more important or less important than something else?
So I have 3 avenues there. I call it the LSD of any company, right? The learn, solving, and doing. Are you going to learn something? You don't need real time to learn something real time. It's 1 week, a day old is good enough. Are you solving for a problem? Again, you don't need real time because you can still wait on a day old or a 2-day old or a week old data to solve problems. Doing is where you actually need real time stuff. So when I mean doing, if you're going to be doing real time bidding on keywords, if you're going to be retargeting customers real time, if you're going to be communicating to customers real time, that's the only place you need real time. So I think more often than not, in most cases, especially for younger companies, I'm not saying don't chase real time. All I say is see what you can do best with the data that you already have. You understand completely how your business is, who your business is composed of, and why is it ticking and what is running it, and what are the key problem areas and how it can be solved. If you can solve all of that, and that can be oldish data too, and just use real time for applications that are doing the application jobs, I think that makes your lives much easier and can also help you find answers much faster.
I like your point that it's not the objective, right? The objective isn't the real-time insights. It's what is your objective to do, and then how do you get and make the decisions at the right time that's going to influence the right outcome. That makes sense. Where do you see the limits in data? When do you feel like there's some other way or thinking or approach, or when do you have to stand out of that to actually bring success?
I think when the data but the problem that you're trying to solve does not exist or is very sketchy and at best, I like throw my hands up in the air and say, don't try to even solve it with data, with like 5 data points and 10 data points, and don't even try to solve it. Best examples are a new product that you're trying to build and you want to understand how successful it will be. Trying to look into an old product to do it is unfair. You can say lookalike and stuff, but it's not going to be that correct. 2, trying to understand the market and what your customers are doing outside. It's very hard. Yes, there is so many data points out there, but you can know exactly what they do in your ecosystem, but what they do outside is very, very hard to do unless you do it really well. And those are really 2 examples I can think of where saying these are the limitations of data and I can't use them. And the third one is how somebody feels. Yes, you can do a survey, but the surveys all have bias. People can do all ones or all tens or all zeros. So it's again really hard. So the best way to do it is a customer focus interview, sit down, good old focus interview, sit them down, ask them what their problems are. And I've heard sometimes in customer quality interviews, a sample size of 1 is much better than 200 survey data points because you can actually ask and poll and feedback stuff really well, and you can connect to them, understand their emotional needs better through than data. So yes, there are areas where data is definitely not going to solve it. Using data and data tools are really good when you have a lot of data for it and have captured it really well, and you believe that the credibility of the data is also good.
So let's look to the future. So where do you see all this heading to? Like, what do you imagine, even for yourself, your career will be like in 5 or 10 years? And where's data playing in that for organizations? And how will the tools and the opportunities change, do you think?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what we do will get commoditized is how I look at it. Basically, my job will become redundant, which I'm really happy about. And that's how we operate, which is basically, when I say redundant, I don't mean we won't have a job to do. It'll be the job we do in the current state won't exist, right? A lot of stuff that we do, driving insights and finding out patterns, there are already so many tools and products coming in the market which can do that for you. So a lot of our energies and efforts will then move towards, okay, what do we do with this then? I think taking what happens and collecting the data has become much easier, much faster. Storing the data become much easier, much faster. Processing the data has become much easier, much faster. And visualizing it, driving insights, showing whatever it is. But the why is still not become that commoditized. So we probably will spend a lot more time doing the why. And I think that is probably what the next 5 years will be, or the 5 years after. And maybe when you have that level of intelligence, which can also find out the why something's going on. Your customers are not coming to the website as much as they did. Why? I don't know. Now I have to go look into the data. I spend so much time collecting the data, cleaning the data. By the time I find out the why, I am tired, the data is tired, the person who asked is tired. But maybe in 5 years' time, it will all be available. My job will be to find out the why and tell you why it happened. And maybe after that, the why also will be available. So then we'll have to do something else. Hopefully that's what will happen and become more interesting.
I think that's great on the insight side. What about on you talked about, real-time insights can be really important as it feeds into applications, right? This move into that more personalization because cost of processing is much cheaper, the mobility of it, the security of it, all these things are starting to be solved for the customer. Where do you see us on that personalized kind of journey? Do you see that growing greater to kind of that mass personalization? Again, a term that was thrown around and maybe not quite realized. What does the future look like for the customer that you envision?
So I think one thing that's really important for a customer is, as a customer for myself, and I'm for the business to understand me first. And when I mean understand my taste and know who I am. I think that is in itself is not being done by a lot of businesses. You'd be amazed. You call your bank up, for example, they would know that you have this other thing with them, and they're like, I don't even know who. And you're like, I know I can see these three things with me, and why can't you see? So I think that will become seamless, where they will know who you are, and you don't have to explain it, punch in 55 pin codes and all of that stuff. So that part will become much easier. So your interactions will become much more seamless in that way. That's one. And number two, I think from a personalization lens, it will be more around making your shopping experience or your buying experience or your usage experience a bit less friction in how you do it, so that you don't have to space a lot of time searching for stuff. You can just, the way I tell people is, the best example I give is, Facebook knows you better than your better half or your spouse does, and Google knows you better than even you know yourself. And so they do that because before even you type, it knows what you're going to look for. I think that is the level of expectation I think products and services will evolve to, where they know what you're coming for. They know you're coming in for your second purchase because you've already just bought a shoe like 6 months ago and you need a shoe. Will automatically, are you here to buy a shoe? Yes, okay, here's a shoe. And so basically, the way I typically pitch the future of personalization is the past of how a human interaction would be. So you'd walk into a store, the store owner would know you, that you come once a year to buy stuff. He's like, hey, how are you? I think you want a shoe now. And that experience will be available on the digital world. I think that will be the ultimate personalization, honestly.
Sounds amazing. Do you think the customer is going to be using that to their advantage as part of that journey? Are they going to get more comfortable with that type of suggestive, or do you think that there'll be an empowerment level also in there for the customer?
Yeah. So I think the way I think about it from a customer lens is, it'll make my time spent on site much lesser. So I don't have to spend 10 minutes doing something which I could do it in 2. So I don't have to go search for a shoe, filter 15 filters, search for a color. Everything is seamless. You go, it asks you, are you here for a shoe? You say, yes, this is the shoe. Yes, you want to buy it? Yes, I can give you a price. Yes, done. So I save the other 8 minutes to do other things. And there are so many things that we need to do these days. So it will save the time and effort and initiative for you, is how I think about it.
No, I love it. I love it. Where can listeners learn more about you?
So I have a website, kshirasaagar.com, that I write stuff in, but mostly I write for cmo.com.au, where I write articles about how I think. And I do so many conferences a year, around 30 odd conferences a year. So in one of those, you definitely hear me speak and say the same things, but a new story every time. I make it sure there's a new story every time. So that's something I'll make sure I'll give you.
Oh, everyone can learn something from you every time, I am sure. And I feel very lucky. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to go into some rapid fire questions. What's your guilty pleasure?
Play a lot of video games. That's my guilty pleasure off late. Like one way to unwind after a hectic day. That's one.
Have you got a favorite game?
It'd be unfair to pick one. I like all of them.
Love it. What about a brand that inspires you and why?
I'd say Apple, because I think I like how they build products that everybody can pick up and use easily without having to go through training. It's very intuitive and at the same time innovative, which is what I really love about how they approach their product lineup and what they do.
And then if you could pick any age you could stay for the rest of your life, what would it be? Why?
Interesting question. I'd say that'd be the age when I'm at 2040, when singularity hits. When singularity hits, all the problems in the world will be solved, apparently. So I want to be that age forever, 2040, whatever it is.
Sounds good. Who knows what that will look like, right? I know the promise is there. Kshira, thank you so much for joining us. I think there were so many lessons there. I love all your acronyms. Was that part of just helping organizations learn that you came up with them? I mean, you joked before it's how you remember them, but there's got to be more to that. It's certainly going to be helpful to our listeners.
It's definitely easier for people to keep track. And so you can keep coming back to it and refer to it again and again. So there's a construct that people like, and everyone likes a construct. So you can say, remember, we had this conversation. I said D cube, where are you on the D cube? And so then the conversation becomes more structured and easier. So that's why I really like acronyms. The recall power of them are really good. So that's really good.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Emma. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is hosted by DigiVisor and I'm Emma LaRusso. Bye for now.